Well, Shaner, thanks for going down this path with me once again. We've done this a few times in a couple different contexts, but I got to start off by saying that in getting to know you, even, early on first when we became friends, and then going through hearing your story every single time, it is on my mind more often than you can think, but it's a source of inspiration and something that ties back to the lifeguarding world that I think is super important. That's been on my mind for a long time,
right,
but also super beneficial for everyone that's going to hear it on the podcast and stuff. So lifeguards all over. So thanks for, and also for those that don't know, you just got married.
I did, literally, Thursday, Friday. Today's Monday, so 5 days ago, yeah.
Yeah, and you flew back from Hawaii, and now we're
Last
sitting
night.
here,
Yeah.
and you're choosing to spend your morning with me, so thanks for that, too. And that's just, once again, more indicative of lifeguarding, the culture, and the connections that we make, I think. So I wanted to put those two little details out there.
Yeah.
But let's just start off with, kind of where you grew up and how the heck you got into lifeguarding or finding lifeguarding as a job.
Yeah, so I'm one of those inland kids that somehow ended up a lifeguard. I guess my journey starts back to starting swimming at 5 years old and getting into water polo in middle school, and was able to continue that through college.
And inland where?
Inland, east of Sacramento. So 3 hours to any ocean. Close to some lakes and rivers, but not a regular ocean individual growing up. Visit, have no clue what was going on at the water, but would get in it occasionally, and Uncle would push me into some waves at indicators in Santa Cruz and stuff. But yeah, I had no clue until after college. Like really after college, wasn't sure what to do. After going through college, I wasn't sure what to do, what I wanted to do career-wise, and so started taking EMT class at my local JC, and I got really interested in the fire route and becoming a firefighter. And my brother, who went to school in Santa Cruz, and our family rule was you get a job or you come home during summer. So he became an ocean lifeguard, and my mom was like, "Are you sure you can do that? Like, you know where we grew up? Like, I don't feel comfortable with you doing that." And but my uncle, surfboard shaper in Santa Cruz, was like, "Oh, he's really good in the water. I've been with him a lot." And so my brother Greg got into the ocean lifeguarding first. And so when I took my EMT and got interested in the fire route, he's like, "Hey, you should come out and like try out to be a lifeguard. Like, it's a good way of like learning those skills." And a lot of like fire departments really like seeing that on a resume, because you gain some really firsthand experience with dealing with patients and rescues and that sort of thing. And so I was like, "Oh, okay, that sounds interesting." And he's like, "But come out and like let's get you in the water and get you introduced to it and help you figure it out." I was like, "Okay, sounds good." So like tryouts back then were in March, and I started coming out like early, like late fall, all the way through winter. I'd come out every other week, come in on Thursday night, stay till Monday afternoon, and just every day during that time I was doing swim runs at.
This was in Santa Cruz, and Greg was already lifeguarding.
Yeah, Greg was already a lifeguard too, and so he was working winter shifts. So I would he'd go into work, and I'd meet him at like this Manresa State Beach, which was for Santa Cruz the most similar way to set up for Huntington, because it was just big rips, and especially in winter and fall and spring, that's like very typical big rips, a lot of swell, and so we would go there, and he'd be like, "Okay, like we'd map out how to spot a rip current and all that sort of stuff." And then he's like, "Hey, you're gonna hop in this, take it out, and then you have to navigate your way back in, and then we're just gonna keep doing that for a couple hours." And so it was just me, and he would just be driving in the lifeguard truck, so there's no one else on the beach. And so it was pretty entertaining and humbling also at the beginning, because it was like, pretty consistent good surf that I was thrown into pretty early. And it was kind of like a sink or swim moment. And so just was doing that very regularly up until the tryout. And the tryout went well. Fortunately, it was flat, and so it played into my strengths of swinging water polo, and didn't have to figure out too hard where I needed to be.
And what year did you try out?
That was 2013.
Okay.
And then made but I think I finished second in the swim, and then in the run swim run I finished somewhere in the top 6. But running was not my strong suit, especially coming off a back injury, and so running in thick neoprene was not ideal for me. But the swim was my strength anyway. So
The necessary evil.
the necessary evil of lifeguarding is running.
A lot.
Yeah. Good for sprinting. Long distance, I'm not a fan. And so got to the tryout, and then did the interview, and was brought on by Santa Cruz, and went down to Huntington, and yeah, that was a whole different animal. You get used to seeing a lot of only going to really Santa Cruz and not really seeing much of Huntington growing up. You're just like, there's just sand everywhere, and you're like, well, where are like your bluffs, and like where's like all this different types of structures?
Let me slow you down just for 1 second, just to clarify for people who don't know. So Santa Cruz with the state parks.
Yeah.
Obviously, if someone's listening that's not from California, Santa Cruz is indicated by cliffs, rocks, very interesting little coves, and a huge stretch that
Pocket beaches.
Yeah, a lot of miles of beach that are responsible for. And then Huntington State Beach is where we do our lifeguard training for state parks, where it's basically a long stretch of a lot of sand, which creates a dynamic ocean environment. So was that your first time? Because you said that early on you were mostly going to Santa Cruz as far as experiencing the ocean and training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This was your first awareness to like a Southern California.
Yeah, lifeguard training was my
option,
first experience to Southern California. Yeah. I'd been in the ocean as a kid in Southern California, but not like aware or knowledgeable to what was going on or the dynamics of what that is. So lifeguard training was definitely the first kind of experience with that exposure. And so, and just kind of seeing how much, sand plays into how it shifts, and then some areas rips are consistent, and these little quick rips pop up, and like with Huntington, how river mouths create those consistent and constant rip currents, and how like different types of swell directions change how the sand moves and where rips will form.
What was your experience with training? How did you do?
I did okay. So first day of lifeguard training.
I wasn't at the front of the pack either, don't worry.
No, again, running my nemesis. That was back when the Mega was still part of it. The Mega, not a fun day. But so the day 1 of lifeguard training, we do a bottom check. It's like, you get in the water before class starts and test out the bottom, see where things are. Well, putting on my fin, first day I dislocate my toe. It goes like a full 90, and I like pop it back in, and I'm like, well, I already got here. I'm like, I'm not leaving, because it was like a lot of people like medical out, or and I was like, I'm not gonna tell them. I'm just gonna duct tape them together to the other toe, and I'll just power through. And so every run from that point on sucked, which was day 1 of 8. So running in the soft sand, not being a runner to begin with, and then you put a little dislocated toe in there, was not an ideal situation, but I just through grit, just powered through it, and just iced every night. Just had my cooler that I had my lunch in during the day, and that was filled up with ice and water at the night, and just put my foot in there. And
hopefully you took the food out before.
Oh yeah.
I
went through so many Clorox wipes that week, cleaning that thing out. And so like the Huntington experience was very interesting. Just the amount of swell that Huntington receives, and the size of the rip currents, and just how the wind can also impact that as well. So there was a lot of different factors that I kind of experienced within that 8 days. That being in the water from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, you get to really kind of understand and experience a lot more, and it's this massive just knowledge dump that you're trying to absorb as much as possible. And being a sponge, you're only absorbing so much, but it was definitely an eye-opening experience, and like a great kind of starter to my continuation of my lifeguard career.
And how long were you in Santa Cruz before you moved down to Southern California? After training?
Yeah, so I moved to San Diego February of 2017. So I guess 4 years I was in Santa Cruz. I started working year round at year 2 in Santa Cruz. So my rookie year, no rookies are work off season work, and so, but my year 2 I was getting some off season shifts. Mainly I was working at the Hollister, the off road park, but also like on my days off I was working doing the association stuff, and so I was like at headquarters, and I was also like, okay, when there's gonna be a call, like my wetsuit and fins are in the back of the truck, so it's like, hey, if the skis gonna be launched, hey, you need a deckhand?
Yeah, you were hungry for experience.
So I was hungry for experience, so I was always kind of hanging around, be like, hey, if you need an extra hand, I'll hop on this call. Yeah, I can go. And so I was always kind of sticking around trying to get as much experience and with anyone that would have taken me on for the call or whatever. And I definitely, like, there was at least 5 or 6 times where I was at headquarters that year too, that they were launching the ski. And I walk out of the headquarters to the parking to the garage. I'm like, hey, you need a deckhand? They're like, yep. I'm like, all right. Grab my wetsuit and fins and rash guard, and then hop in the truck with them and go up to the North Coast. And they're like, okay, figure it out. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
It was
for people that don't know, the Santa Cruz coastline is one of the more intense places to lifeguard too. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there, cars off the side of the cliff, people getting washed off of rocks and immediately drowning.
Yeah.
A lot of intense calls. Are there any standout ones that you remember in that 4 years before going down to San Diego?
in pertaining to the North Coast or just in Santa Cruz in
No,
general?
just your 4 years in Santa Cruz. I mean, your early lifeguard career.
Yeah.
Any standout calls that you would pick out from that time that made an impact on you?
I would say probably it was, there was probably 3 that I can think of. So one was my rookie year. I had 8 rescues in one day, which is, for Santa Cruz, not common. As much as, like, there's a lot of water moving, the water's also cold. Doesn't get that warm. Like, you don't want to, you're very rarely trunking it on your PT break. You're throwing a 2 mil short sleeve on, and that you're okay for a bit.
Yeah.
But I had 8 in one day. I think it was like right after 4th of July weekend, and I was rookie guard working a senior tower, and the rips were popping off, and like I was in and out of the water all day, and that was a really good experience because it was like, okay, like I got this. Like I can make these rescues and get these people out and navigate this with the limited knowledge that I had at the time.
And that kind of seals the training of, once you have a day like that, right? That seals that training of, like, this is what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
But then you experience it and you go, oh,
Yeah, they weren't wrong.
well, I like this.
Yeah,
This is cool.
This
Yeah.
is fun. The second one, so that was year 2, and this was actually an off-duty medical that I responded to. And this one was, again, after 4th of July. Santa Cruz and 4th of July are chaos. It's one of the few areas where they still light off mortars off East Cliff and all that sort of thing. So it was off duty, and I was home. I'd worked for all 4th of July weekend, and it was like Sunday morning, July 5. And I didn't know who they were, but it was like a neighbor kid, and they were talking about some like Roman candle they'd found at the beach, and I hear them talking, then they light it off, and I hear a big boom, and like so much that it pushes me back a little bit. Like I'm probably 10 feet from where it probably happened. I'm like, that was a pretty big like concussion, and so like it's silent for like 5 seconds. I'm like, it's a little weird for that to go off and then kids to be silent, and then I hear like, oh, you're okay, you're okay. I'm like, that's not a good sign. And so I'm like, grab my locals and a couple of gloves that I had in the back of my truck. One tears as I'm walking around the block, like jogging around the block to go to the driveway. So I'm like, okay, I got one glove. This one's done, so whatever. And I get up there and I just see 4 kids clustered up and like 1 adult, and just kind of chaos all on scene. And come up, I'm like, hey, like I'm a lifeguard, can I help? And they're like, yeah, his hand. I'm like, okay, like, all right. And then I take a look, and yeah, the kid had blown off his hand from his wrist on. What they thought was Roman candle, it being like basically a quarter stick of dynamite, and had massive concussion burst to his face, and I was alone. Like I was just, year 2 lifeguard, just EMR certified, hadn't done anything else, and I'm like, okay, I got to respond to this call. I'm like, hey, did anyone call 911? No? Okay, call 911, give me the phone. Like, talk to fire dispatch, and then I'm dealing with the patient, like, young individual, young teenager, and just talking to him through what I'm going to be doing and trying to keep him calm, and then do the whole handoff when fire arrives. And I was like, that was legit.
Yeah.
And that was like a good experience of kind of like, okay, like I can respond to like a serious medical, handle like multiple things, and then get things going, and then handle the handoff to paramedics when they arrived on scene. And that was a big one because it was like, you don't really want to, like, other than fire, like you don't really see people missing appendages in your normal day life other than probably 4th of July if you're out inland. And
Yeah, or more rarely, right?
yeah, it's very rare unless you're
in the
like
lifeguard world.
unless you're like throwing back a lot of alcohol and making a stupid decision. You don't see that too often. And so that was a very interesting one that definitely molded like how I would deal with severe calls going forward.
Yeah. But how cool that in that early stage, one of your most memorable calls were an off-duty situation where you decided to act.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's indicative of just connecting, as I always do, things to the broader lifeguard essence, let's call it, is could you have chosen to just call 911 and not show up? Absolutely. I mean, you're a second-year guard, you have some experience, but this is a totally different call, and you choose to go help your neighbor in your community off-duty after just having worked an entire weekend where you were probably super busy.
Oh, just mentally just tapped,
Right.
just sun-fried. You're just like, it's like those 12 hours on the day, and you get home and you're like, I don't want to do anything
your
else.
brain just wants to relax and everything. And how cool that, I mean, once again, and this is the point I've made several times, which is this is the essence of what lifeguards do.
Mm-hmm.
And most people that work in the profession do it because they want to provide service to people in their community. But it's interesting that it's not some crazy restaurant. You're like, oh, this call, and then the skills you were taught just shortly before came through in a real life situation where you can't test that in a training scenario, but you actually were able to experience it and then prove to yourself, oh, well, that was pretty intense, and I was able to follow through, and that builds that next layer of like you said, you wanted to start by going into the fire service and all stuff, but that starts actually formulating your path and going, oh, wait.
I'm getting some real world knowledge and experience with this, and getting my feet wet, so to speak, and getting like these types of calls.
Wow.
And
so where does San Diego come into play? And how did that come into moving down south?
So San Diego came into play. So I was halfway through my 3rd year, I was promoted to a lifeguard 2. And I worked as a lifeguard 2. I was doing the schedule and some things. And I was kind of looking at, we received multiple transfers from Huntington, like Santa Cruz. We were always kind of getting transfers here and there, and like talking to them about their experiences at their beach, what kind of calls they saw, kind of what kind of resources they got to use. Like Huntington was always interesting because of the boat, and it was like, okay, being a deckhand on a boat, like making a ton of rescues and like figuring out that, like how to hook up, like always having to be knowledgeable. It's like hooking up another boat for tow, all these things. It's like very diverse in that aspect, so I found that very intriguing. Warmer water also sounded interesting. I was, when you show up, when you're working a unit shift in Santa Cruz, you have like your PT wetsuit, your rescue, your work wetsuit, and then maybe if you want to like surf right after work, you got a 3rd wetsuit. So like you're packing a lot of neoprene in a day, and then you're packing like shoulder season. It's like, it could be warm enough where you're just wearing a long sleeve and your boardies and like maybe sandals or your blue Vans, or you're wearing like boots, your pants, your board shorts.
It's different than what
long
most
sleeve
people
shirt,
imagine
t-shirt,
lifeguarding.
and jacket, and then beanie, and you're like,
it's not just trunks and tanning up in Santa Cruz. No.
You get your days. There are days, but they're
there's a lot of bundled up.
There's a lot of bundled up.
Half peeled in the tower with a wetsuit and
like May weekends working a tower, you were in your wetsuit, like half on, with your long sleeve shirt, t-shirt, and jacket and beanie, and wool blanket that you're supposed to use for hypothermic patients wrapped around you, going, oh boy, just freezing. Because those towers don't block the chill in Santa Cruz.
But you wanted to get some experience down in a
Yeah, I
different
wanted to get some
environment.
experience because Santa Cruz, as much of the it gets a lot of surf, and gets good visitation, and even times really like busy visitation. Water activity is very hit and miss. Unless it's like, there was a few times where I worked and it'd be like my last summer there was like, or the second to last summer there was like 90-degree air temp, and the water was actually like 69, 70 degrees. So we got a lot of water activity that summer. But I wanted to get some more experience with just a lot of visitation, a lot of water usage, and just kind of work on those skills. And moving south was the best option to do that. And so I did the state park EMT class after year 2, and met some people from San Diego, and met people from Huntington, and again talked to them about their experiences. And after year 3, I took a surf trip, visited my sister in college, and surfed there. And then I was like, I'll meet up with the guys that I met at the EMT class down in San Diego, and I'll like go surf with them and hang out with them and kind of explore those beaches a little bit. And like surfing down there, and I remember surfing and like everyone being so nice. I was like, no one's frowning in this lineup. No one's got like mean mugging me right now, and I'm just paddling out. This is really nice. Like, what is going on? Like, the weather must be really nice for people to be this nice. And I was like, kind of reaching a point. I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready to jump and learn this more experience. And called a couple of my buddies and called Joel, and I was like, hey, like I'm thinking about transferring. He's like, yeah, you should do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. I just need to figure out like a place to live. Like I could, I've got my truck set up so I can sleep out of the back of my truck. He's like, I don't worry about it. I got a couch. I'm like, all right, sweet. So in February 2017, I moved down, loaded up my truck and rolled up and planted my spot on the couch. And literally within 3 days of me arriving, I was already working shifts. Thought I was going to take a month off and like get to explore. And but San Diego, just like the perm handling the scheduling, he's like, can you work? I'm like, I just arrived the other day, but sure, like I haven't done an orientation or anything. He's like, well, we need you to work some shifts. I'm like, okay.
Classic.
Within the next day, I'm already driving the unit and stuff, and I'm like, I drove the unit in Santa Cruz, but like I don't know where I am. Like, there was one incident where, I guess not an incident, but like worked the event, and I was solo driving the vehicle back, and I'm like, needed to drop this person off at the shop. And I'm like, okay, what's the shop and where's the shop? Like, and he's like, what's this? And I'm like, okay. And he's like, oh, it's locked. I'm like, okay. And he's like, I'll just put it on the radio. And I'm like, okay, well, like, he's like, it's the shop. I'm like, okay. Well, like, so I put it on the radio. I'm like, hey, could any available like unit like help us unlock the shop? And they're like, was this 652 or 654? And I'm like, and I look at the guard next to me who's works in San Diego, been in San Diego a couple of years, and I'm like, do you know? And he's like, nope. I'm like, well, it's this one near this, and they're like, oh, that's 652, and I'm like, okay, cool, thank you.
But classic lifeguard move where you're like, I'm gonna show up to a completely different place, crash on another lifeguard's couch, show up to an environment I have no clue about. Oh yeah, we're understaffed, so they need me to work shifts. I'll figure it out. Yeah. That's what I'm hearing, though. And that once again, these things, although they seem like inconspicuous,
right.
This is the approach where you still know how to effect a rescue in the water. You still know how to do the job. Is it going to be different and maybe challenging in a different way? Right. But this is the mentality, and this is indicative also of your character too, of going, yeah, you know what? I'm going to figure this out. And all the stuff we're going to get into too, I think these are important details in who you are as a person and how you approach life in general that provide that context for, everything. So we can spend a bunch of time talking rescues and all those things, but let's get into, so you were down in San Diego working for state parks, and the city of Carlsbad had a lifeguard operation there where you also applied and got a job and you were working. Yeah. And that basically takes us into kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're chatting in today. So talk to me about kind of starting to work there and leading up to what we're going to be getting into anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
With how that got involved.
Yeah, so the city of Carlsbad, it was the pilot program in 2017. Honestly, the only reason I started working for them is that I maxed out my hours with the state. Found out the Thursday before Memorial Day weekend, that I ran out of hours.
Yeah, seasonal job.
Yep, and thought my demotion from 2 to 1 changed that, but didn't. And so they're like, "Okay, you're done. You gotta take 3 months off." I'm like, "I just got here. Like, I'm supposed to work this summer to figure this out and like learn about this operation." I'm like, "Okay, well now what do I do?" I'm like, "Well, I can take the summer off and just surf." I'm like, "Never had that. That sounds pretty cool." And I was like, "No, I want to work." And so I called into multiple agencies, but they'd already done all their tryouts and stuff. Like, it's late May, so they pretty much, there's no openings anywhere.
Yeah. But you're like, I still want a lifeguard.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go get a job as anywhere else. I want a lifeguard still.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And so all of a sudden, like, I get a call from my buddy. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to work for Carlsbad this summer." I'm like, "Carlsbad?" Like, he's like, "Oh yeah, they're doing a pilot program." I'm like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "Oh, here's this number. Like, give him a call. Like, tell him that you can work." And I'm like, "All right." So I give him a call and like kind of do like a mini interview over the phone. I'm like, "Hey, I'm a state guard. Like, maxed out my hours. I can work full time for you guys." They're like, "Okay, you're hired." I'm like, "All right, sweet." So like, I think it was first weekend of June is when they started, and yeah, it was a very interesting experience because everyone that was driving the vehicle was a firefighter, paramedic. Some of them had I'd say 90% of them had lifeguard experience prior, varying years of experience. But yeah, they were kind of like, "Well, how do you want this to run?" And I'm like, you want me to tell you how to run it?"
Yeah. And for context, just for people that don't know, this is the stretch of Carlsbad just north of the state beach in between Oceanside. It's just about a mile of beach. That's the city territory there where they started this new program. So it was a
yeah, it's like 3/4 of a mile, and it's like
so people listening that don't know,
like, there's like offshore surf shop, which is like kind of this boundary line where the city property starts and then all the way up to the Oceanside border. And so it's about 3/4 of a mile. And yeah, it was a very interesting setup. Like, it was very rudimentary because it was a test, so to speak. So we didn't have all the, there were no towers. We were on top of sand mounds with wooden platforms and easy ups, just exposed. It was very interesting though. Gave you a nice 360 view.
Yeah.
But no hiding. But it was a really good experience because that stretch of beach is very dynamic. It gets a lot of rip currents. The way it's angled gets a lot of south swell.
Yeah. Shore break.
A lot of it's a notorious little shore pound stretch. And so like that summer working there, you saw a lot of different kind of setups with how the sand moves. So that was a very amazing experience to see that because coming from Santa Cruz, I never saw sand shift so much within a day. And so that was really an awesome experience to see that. And it was also very warm. So it was like mid-70s. So it's like didn't need to pack a wetsuit at all. Got a lot of body surfing in and made a lot of rescues. And it was a very great experience. And we kind of were creating our own, we got to do our own kind of thing. They were very hands off in like our approach, like however you want a lifeguard, kind of lifeguard. And so I got to be as busy as I wanted, and which was a lot of fun and kept me in shape. And I was like getting ready to come back to state for the fall. But yeah, it was a great experience because it was, we were using Army Navy's tower as our home base because that was the only structure that we technically were available to use, and everything else was on sand mounds and fish and tackle boxes, med kits, and no close. Army Navy had a bathroom, and we either had to run down the state and go to the bathroom. So
that'll be a challenge forever for a lifeguard.
That stretch will always have that issue. Where are you going to go to the bathroom? What time of the day is it? And how far do we need to run?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everywhere. That's the thing that unifies all of us. Well, let's get into that day when
Yeah.
you were lifeguarding and just walk me through kind of, let's start
Yeah.
going into the story.
Yeah, so it was middle of August, so school had just gone kind of back into session, and it was Thursday, so it was August 17th. Obviously, summer was kind of winding down in some aspects. We had a little bit of swell in the water. It was a very uneventful day leading up to it, but around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, my unit pulled up and see if I wanted to take a quick PT break. Being myself, who is always wanting to get in the water to stay busy and learn more, I was like, yeah, 100% I'll get in the water. So I hop in. I'm at Beach Ave in the city of Stretch, which is about the midpoint on that patrol area. And there's a nice little sandbar just up coast to the tower. And so I hop in the rip, drops me right off on the sandbar. Set comes through, and the first wave of the set take off on, and doesn't really pan out because there's a little bit of wind, so it's kind of getting knocked down a little bit, but the inside section's kind of doubling up and reforming.
And so let me just translate the lifeguard term, because I get you, but I just want for people who aren't lifeguards. Alex is on his break, body surfing, so he can train, and you're getting a break from sitting in the tower, getting a workout in, and he's body surfing just north of his tower right now for people listening that aren't lifeguards, just so they translate that real quick.
Yeah, too focused on my
No, you're good. No,
on my
you're good.
zone,
Yeah,
but
keep going.
Yeah, and so I'm just north of the tower, and first wave of the set doesn't really pan out, so I kick out of it. And so like kicking out of it, the way kind of we're taught lifeguarding is to like lead with your front hand and kind of go down at a downward angle and kind of towards the back of the wave. So that way you kind of get to this kind of pocket where you can kind of punch through without getting thrown over the falls or hitting anything on the bottom. And so the first one I do that, and nothing, and all good, and I kind of make a couple kicks and strokes a little towards the back to the peak, and then the second wave of the set kind of doubles up right around me, and so I turn around onto that and kick into that one, and that one definitely has a much better shape because it's kind of second wave of the set's a bit cleaner, and so I'm doing them, all the different kind of things you can do, body surfing, couple spinners, and as I call it my favorite, it's like the lazy boy. You basically lay on your back with your hands behind your head, and you kind of manipulate your back to kind of slide up and down the wave, but if it's steep enough, you're basically just sliding. And I go back and kind of roll it back over and setting up for like the inside section where it kind of reforms and kind of gives a little barrel. And so I tuck into that real quick, and then I'm like, okay, sweet. Like I'm going to kick out and then get another wave. Like I'm going to try and get as many waves as I can in this little 15-minute workout that I can get. And so I kick out the way I'd done on the first wave. And right as I kind of punch through, my shoulder hits the sandbar, and then I feel my temple hit, and then my head just snaps over to my right shoulder, and I hear a pop, and then I black out. And I come to, and I'm face down in the water, and open my eyes, and I'm like, okay, that's obviously concussion, and doing like quick little kind of assessment where I'm at, and I'm like, okay, concussion, probably need to swim in. Tell my supervisor, might miss a day or two of work, like we'll find out, like, but it's not a big deal.
And we're talking split second thoughts.
Oh yeah,
right
these
here.
are all these like bang, 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 bang,
Yeah.
bang. But talking through it always goes so much slower than in the
Sure.
moment
Yeah,
of
course.
100%. And so I go to take a stroke with my left arm, and it doesn't move. And I'm like reasoning with myself. I'm like, well, if I knock myself unconscious, I probably dislocated it, and I just can't feel it. So I go to take a stroke with my right arm, and nothing moves. So I'm like, well, that's weird, but we'll figure it out later, and I'll just kick in now. And I go to kick, and nothing moves. And I'm just kind of floating there face down, and I'm looking, I'm like, this is not good. But we're going to try and figure this out. And so then a wave rolls over my back, and I'm like, okay, this next wave, I'm going to count the number of seconds between this wave and the next, and then I'm going to roll over so I can breathe, because I'm just looking at sand and...
Yeah, at this point you're face down in the water.
Yeah.
After having body surfed and gotten knocked out, and you're just floating there. Now you're realizing nothing's moving.
Yeah.
Arms or legs.
Yeah. All of my extremities are not functioning at this point. And so I'm like, okay, like this next wave I'll roll over so I can breathe. And then I'll be able to call for help from my coworkers, let them know that I'm in a spot where I need help getting out of the water. And about 15 seconds later, that wave came, and I went to roll, and I didn't roll over. And partly because I couldn't move my shoulders, and the second part of that was I was in a little inshore hole, which is like in a river, we call it an eddy. And basically, it's this smooth, calm piece of water that's just stagnant, because all the water around it is creating this little pocket that just doesn't move. And it's like
the waves pushing you in, but the
Currents
pulling out, so you're in this no man's land of sticking in a spot where you're not going forward or backwards, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and so I'm stuck here, and I'm like, okay, what is my next option to, one, trying to get the help that I can get, and I'm like thinking through, and I'm like, well, I'm kind of stuck here. So my next thought is like, okay, well, I need to be as viable of a patient and stay alert as long as I can. Well, that means holding my breath for how much I have left, which I don't know how long I'd been out for or all these things. So I'm like, okay, I need to hold my breath, don't take in any water. And I was like thinking, as I'm thinking, I'm like, well, I need to slow my heart rate down so I can slow the burn off of oxygen so I can stay alert as long as possible. So I basically kind of close my eyes and I can like hear my heartbeat in my ear. And I'm like feeling it and hearing it slow down. I'm like, okay, we're getting calm. We're going to be in a good like Zen state to kind of really stay. We're going to try and stay as like almost asleep as possible, but still awake and alert. So I'm not like blacking out again. And, you know, in any meditation, like things can flow through your mind and thoughts and stuff. And so, at around 45 seconds, so I felt 3 waves. After like going to the Zen state, I felt 3 waves go over my back. And I'm kind of thinking, I'm like, okay, well, I need to kind of figure out what I'm dealing with and what I need to prepare for. And so at 45 seconds, I'm like, okay, like, where are my coworkers? Because I'm in need of help and like not too far from my tower. Like, what's going on? But as it turns out, I was in this spot in mid-August. We get this really bad glare at around 5 to 5:30 where you can't see anything in the water unless you're a quarter mile north or south of that tower to see where I was in the water. I was dead center in this thing. And
well, let alone someone who's prone
Yes.
in whitewash where the head isn't even sticking up. It's just barely the back of your head.
just barely the back of my head.
Even
and probably
without glare is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, just the back of my head and my butt, and probably my heels for my fins.
Yeah.
And so I'm like thinking like, okay, well, like I need to probably prepare myself for what's coming forward. So I'm like thinking like, do I have any regrets? Do I be missed?
And you're counting this time. I mean, we're breaking down this moment, which is literally maybe a couple minutes long,
Yeah.
but you're counting. You're face down, you realize you have no option to move, and you're counting the interval between waves, which is determined by the swell that's coming, and that's how you're now realizing, okay, this is what I'm working with.
Yeah.
I mean, how incredible that you're building off of lifeguard knowledge to go, okay, I need to decrease my oxygen use. What else do I have left? Oh yeah, my timing is now the waves.
Yep.
So I know how long I'm holding my breath or how long is passing.
Yeah.
And that's about all I can do right now besides trying to turn over and try to get a breath.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack
Yeah,
there.
couldn't move my arm with my
Yeah.
watch on my wrist in front of my face to look at the time. So got to go off what nature's providing me.
Okay, so and now we're at 45 seconds in,
Yeah.
and you're starting to, some other things are going through your head
Yeah,
now.
other things are going through my head, and I'm starting to get those diaphragm spasms. Obviously, you know, whenever you hold your breath for a long period of time, your body's going to be like, no, we don't want to do this. Like, we need to breathe. So it's like very forced, and you have to like control it in a manner to suppress that and power through. And so I was dealing with a little bit of those, but by meditation, I can kind of control them and let the body relax and continue to work through and stay conscious during that time. So, you know, I thought if do I have any regrets and whatever, and I'm like, okay, like I think I've lived a good life and I don't have any regrets, and I think I'll genuinely be missed. I'm like, okay, like clear that out of the mechanism, go back to Zen state. We need to stay alive and awake, and so clear the mind. But like minute 15 seconds, another 2 waves goes over, and the spasms fire up again. I'm like, okay, these are the intervals are starting to shorten up a bit. And so then I'm like, okay, well, will it be a funeral? Will it be a celebration of life? And I'm like, well,
So thoughts of
death are starting to come through my mind, because I'm preparing myself for what I thought is the inevitable, which is what I thought potentially could come to pass. So I wanted to be as prepared as I could be for when that moment came, and my acknowledgement of it. And so I'm going through that, and then minute 45 go back to the Zen state, minute 45 rolls around, the spasms, I can no longer get calmed down. I can no longer zen them out. And it's like, 'cause I can feel now my throat's like jumping at me. Like every muscle in my neck is like, you need to breathe. And I'm like, well, there's no air where my face is. And so I'm like, I just need to keep my mouth as tight as possible and try and black out without opening my mouth. I was basically just trying to force myself into a shallow water blackout so I could hopefully not take on any water and drown, and hopefully like my coworkers who are nearby-ish get to me in a reasonable time that I am still accessible when I am found. And then I'm like, and finally at the front of my head goes, well, are we okay with what's about to happen? And so it's like my conscious self and my mind preparing myself for the possibility of death is like, are we sure? Am I okay with dying? And it's like, and then in the moment self's like, well, we don't really have a choice in the matter. Like, can't do anything about it. Like, I'm a limp noodle here floating in the ocean. Like, what's going to be is going to be. And I'm like, well, I'm 26, a little young, but lived a relatively good life, and didn't get to experience all that I wanted to. Then I'm like, but I'm going out body surfing. Don't really get a choice in the matter of like how people do that. Like a lot of worse ways you can go. And I was like, well, at least I'm dying in the ocean. Like, that's fitting, and that's a good way to go. And as soon as I kind of accepted that death was going to be probably imminent, I like blacked out. And next thing I remember is waking up on the beach to a sternum rub and a modified jaw thrust with a little finger sweep, and opening my eyes and going, what is going on? And going like, hey, am I alive? And they're like, yeah, we just pulled you out of the water. And I'm like, epic.
Who were you seeing around you at that?
So it was my coworker that was at my head. So what I didn't know is that two general public members actually, one found me and then tapped me on the shoulder, and I didn't respond. And when he flipped me over as best he could, my skin was dark blue. And so he started calling for help, and his buddy came down, and they were trying to get me out of the water, but they were like 5'6", and I'm 6'2", 200 pounds, and dead weight. Like, I'm not conscious at this point, and if I was, I couldn't do anything anyway. And so they're calling for help, and then my coworkers hear the call for help, so they come running down. A couple off-duty firefighters were on the beach, which was very normal for that stretch, and they come down, and so they all pull me up and get me high and dry, so where the water's not going underneath me, so that they can work on me properly. And so once they did that, they did the sternum rub and checked for consciousness, and then I came awake and opened my eyes. I see my coworker with this long Thor blonde-like hair, and I'm like, am I alive? And I'm like, because if I die in the ear to the face I see, this is pretty interesting. Like, that I get a lifeguard Thor as my first sight.
But there was a moment of you weren't sure when you came back to consciousness. Your coworkers, and with some assistance from the public, took you out of that. They got to you.
Yeah.
And there's you're in this moment of surrealism because you had just basically accepted dying.
Yeah. Yeah, accepted dying, blacked out. So like in my mind, I have passed on. Like that I am on the other side of whatever. And I opened my eyes, and opening your eyes after being with your eyes closed, especially in the sun, you're like, is this real? Is this not real? Am I just waking up from a nap?
Sure.
And so I'm looking, and I'm like, that's a face I know, but it's interesting that I'm seeing this face right now. So I'm like, am I alive? He's like, yeah, we just pulled you out of the water. And I'm like, epic. And yeah, they went through their whole patient assessment, and yeah, it was very interesting going through that process on the patient side and not being the the rescuer.
Yeah.
And so, because I knew what was coming next, and so I'm like mentally preparing myself for each step, and like so much so that I'm like, okay, so like I'm thinking of like where I'm going to ask my questions of what's going on. So we do like the hand check for sensation and motor and then pulses. And so like after we finish all that, I'm like, hey, did anything move? And the off-duty firefighter was like the one that was going through that process. He was running the assessment.
Just checking
portion.
your hands, that you have feeling in your hands
Yeah.
and your feet and everything.
Mm-hmm. And I remember him
And to you,
asking
did
me
it
to
feel like
squeeze.
you were actually moving your hands and feet
I
when they
couldn't feel
asked you?
anything.
Okay, you're completely not feeling your body at this time.
Yeah, I was like, so my body was going through was like a form of spinal shock. So my body was just constantly like shaking. It was the only thing that I was sensationally feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I could feel, when they touched my face and stuff, I could feel that. But anything below my shoulders or at my shoulders, I couldn't feel. And so when they were doing that, I'm like, well, I can't feel it. So maybe it moved, but I could still do something. So I was like, hey, did anything move? And they were like, everyone kind of looked at each other, unsure of what to say. I'm like, well, that's not good if you're not just straight up saying anything. And I'm like, please tell me, like, did anything move? And they're like, no, nothing moved. I'm like, okay. Like I say okay, but I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, this is gonna be interesting. This is gonna be this will be a journey. Not sure the extent of it at that time, but I was like, I'll be fine tomorrow, in my mind. And so they do all that, and then they package me up, get me on the backboard. They take me up to, or we had to go to the state side to get to the access for the ambulance. Get back to the ambulance, again, do the whole patient assessment thing all over again. You got 3 to 4 times before you end up in the hospital or wherever your memory ends. The chief of the battalion chief who was overseeing the lifeguard operation comes in the back of the ambulance. He's like, hey, is there anyone you want me to call? And I was like, kind of slowly coming to grasp with the severity of the situation. And I'm like, yeah, we should probably call my brother. My family should probably be aware that I am going to a hospital. I'm breaking the cardinal rule in my family of going to the hospital. So I should probably let them know that I'm doing that. And so that way they can be aware and they can make their decision if they're going to come or not. I'm like, maybe it's not that severe though. Like they don't need to come, but like they can be aware that I'm somewhere. Mm-hmm. But that's my, myself telling myself that it's not as bad as it is or was.
Yeah, but you're still, we're talking minutes here, right? You're processing this step by step, and yeah, what a crazy aftermath of just
this is
what
12
you
minutes post waking up on the beach.
Yeah, exactly. And then they also flew you down, right?
Yeah,
you
so
got life flighted out.
Yeah. So there was a Army-Navy high school, which is a football field, and that's a LZ for a landing zone for a helicopter. And so they drove me over there, and they had the helicopter waiting. And I've loaded a lot of patients into helicopters, and so I remember hearing the blades. I'm like, oh, I'm flying a helicopter. I'm like, this is a bit more severe than I expected. Like, okay, like we're not driving me to the hospital, we're flying me to the hospital. Mm-hmm. It's like, all right, okay. And I remember getting on board there and again going through all the questions of the patient assessment, and then, okay, we're gonna give you fentanyl. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, fentanyl's no. Like, I don't do fentanyl. And then they're like, well, we'll deal with the pain. I'm like, so finally I reluctantly agree to receiving fentanyl. And I remember just going conscious to aware, like really focused on my breathing and controlling my breathing, which is like the only thing I could control. And then the fentanyl, within minutes, just everything became pixelated and memory just completely kind of goes like absent almost. It's like 2 instances in the emergency room that I remember. And then I remember waking up, I think it was probably 2 days later in the hospital, and seeing, family there and stuff.
And how was that moment then of consciousness on the beach, knowing that the people who were taking care of you were, lifeguards that you knew?
Yeah, my
and
peers.
Coworkers and your peers and people you had trained and surfed mm-hmm. with. What was the overall affect on that? Was that helping? Was that hurting?
I think it was helping. I knew I was in good hands. like, not only just like like having the firefighter, paramedic who drove the vehicle, being the supervisor on the beach. So that person was there handling radio communications, getting the necessary resources going. The guy at my head who was at least, I don't even remember what his years were at that time, but definitely more than 6 years of experience as a guard. So I knew I had good kind of experience. And then you had the 3 off-duty firefighter, like one being a retired firefighter paramedic for 20 plus years, the other one a training captain, and the other one a battalion chief. So it's like all those years of experience. I'm like, okay, I'm in good hands.
Yeah.
And so I know I could relax on that aspect on the patient assessment side. I could use my humor to break the tension of the scenario here and there, which was enjoyable and kind of funny to remember by like, remember when I said this on the call, and they'd be like, such a knucklehead, like. Yeah,
but very much you and very much your personality in knowing you, right? And I just think it's important that that's a very interesting interaction that most people don't get to experience, which is you were on the other side being a patient, but your coworkers then knew the patient, which
Right.
is oftentimes we're disconnected in a way where it's easier when you're treating someone you don't know.
Yeah.
You're making jokes, but here they just
Very
pulled your
serious
unconscious
situation.
body out of the water. So what a crazy like scene call, not just for your coworkers and stuff, but affectively too, that
Yeah.
these guys, you knew you were in good hands with your peers and people you've trained with and all that stuff. And not to mention the way you handle, I mean, we didn't even talk about it, but you basically ended up, it was C4, 5, and 6, correct?
Yes, I
that
broke,
was
I
broken.
broke C4, 5, and 6, and then I bruised the spinal cord basically from the bottom end of C2 throughout the entirety of C3.
Oh.
And that controls like your accessory muscles for breathing. And then with that bruise, anything below that point is affected. So anything below that C2, C3 is affected. So I had to effectively learn how to do everything all over again.
Yeah, but those moments on the beach with your coworkers, those if they would have moved your neck the wrong way or something, like they know that those initial moments are some of the most defining moments in a cervical injury,
Right.
where that could be the difference between someone walking again or not.
100%.
And so a very tense and specific moment, but at the same time, intimate with, it's like these are your friends and
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
that did it. So you end up in the hospital. From what I recall, you were on a ventilator for a little while,
For 1 week.
Once you got off of that, you were able to communicate with a very basic form with your family.
Yeah, while on the ventilator, it was basically it's a word chart. It's basically like the alphabet on a laminated piece of paper, and you go letter by letter of what you're trying to spell. Each one of my family members had their different ways of doing it, and again, still being fully paralyzed, and the only thing I could do is blink my eyes or kind of move my head, but I didn't want to. The doctor was like, "Don't move your head."
Yeah.
And so it was like blinking was like yes, and 2 was no, and then eye rolls were like, "Can you figure this out?" So it's a lot of
That was your
eyeball
personality shining through.
communication.
Yeah.
A lot of communication through eyeballs and eyebrow raises and stuff. And so once I got the ventilator out, then I was able to start speaking and communicating that way, and that had to be built back up again because being on the ventilator, decreased my ability to swallow, and all those muscles weren't being used for a week, and so it's insane now to see how quickly your body can atrophy in that state.
Forgive me for interrupting, but you talked about, you met the physician at Project Wipeout who spoke about the amount of fluid that you actually ended up having in your lungs.
Yeah, so that was a year later. For Project Wipeout, I did the one up in here for Hogue, and then they had the first one in San Diego, and that was the lung doctor. And so I knew the damage that I'd done to my neck. So I had broken 4, 5, 6. They did a front and back fusion or anterior posterior fusion, and I was an incomplete quadriplegic. And so I remember going to the talk down in San Diego, and we're right before my doctor and I talk, the physician that does like the fatal, non-fatal drowning conversation talks, and he's showing up all these images and stuff. And during my talk, my educational portion, my physician goes, "You've never seen this before," and hits the next button for the slide, and then you see my lungs. And going through that whole 30 minutes of the lung doc, and I look up and I see mine, I'm like, oh, that's not good. And then I kind of look out to kind of the crowd to kind of like.
And it's an X-ray, right, showing
Yeah.
the fluid
Yes.
within them and stuff, right?
Yeah, it's showing the whole X-ray of my whole like lung cavities, and they're just what should be clear is very varying shades of cloudiness, of like white. So it's all the fluid that's in there. To what my doctor said, and then when I talked to that lung doctor afterwards, my lungs were in the should have been fatal
Category.
So not only did I, nearly snap my head off, I also took in enough water that should have effectively killed me with the amount of fluid that was in my lungs.
Wow.
So,
And then I want to get into, there's an initial hospital, but then we go into, now you're after the initial incident and you get to Craig Hospital. Talk to me about that time there and that recovery process.
Yeah, so I was, being the injury that I had, there's only a handful of places that specialize in spinal cord injury and traumatic brain. And one of them's in Colorado, Craig Hospital. So fortunately we got admitted to go there. And I say we, as like my family and I, that was kind of they were there to support me and provide any support they could. They knew I was going to do my thing, but they were there just like, I wouldn't say the background. They were alongside of me and in the forefront to support me in however I did. And so I went to Craig Hospital, and this time I was able to kind of twitch some leg muscles in my leg. Upper body wasn't really moving anything. And so, that doctor, when I met with that doctor, they were saying that I was most likely going to be in a power wheelchair for life, because statistically, with the amount of damage that I did, that was very much could have been my reality. But my mentality was, hear what they're saying, but also like, I'm going to do whatever I can within my own willpower and being to not make their words my reality. So Craig Hospital was a very amazing experience, because it gave me kind of into my roots of being an athlete and a lifeguard. Whatever I was able to build up and start doing, they would fill my schedule as busy as I could. So that the recovery, that early process was 3 months, and for the inpatient stay, and things, once I started getting stuff moving, it started clicking a lot faster. So things started coming along online, like almost day by day. Like one day something would be happening, and the next day something new would be happening.
Meaning in your body?
In my body, like something new would turn
regaining.
on. Yeah. Something new would turn on, or something would get just a little bit better, just day by day. And so by 2.5 months, I was able to start walking with a walker and a little leg brace. And I would just do laps around my floor for basically, so like, I'd start my sessions at 7 a.m. with physical therapy or occupational therapy for the hands, and I would be done around 6. And then I'd have dinner at 6:15, and I'd be done eating by like 6:45, and from 7 to 8:30, I was doing whatever I could, like walking or going over to the gym and just laying on a mat and just stretching and just moving my body around.
But sounds like to me you're bringing in this lifeguard mentality of give me as much work as you can. I don't care what you say. I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
Within reason, right? But
Right.
like a healthy stubbornness to going, I'm not going to settle for a power wheelchair. Although out of your control, your mindset, what you're indicating is, I'm going to get after this. I'm going to approach this
Right.
aggressively, my treatment and stuff, and take whatever control I have. I think that's such a huge detail. Once again, even just coming from, hey, I'm going to respond to my my neighbor
Yeah.
when I'm a second year lifeguard to, sure, I'll crash on your couch and figure out, oh, there's no more hours left. Cool. I'm going to go to the next thing. I'm going to get this other lifeguard job. Like, that's so, for people that don't know you, and I'm fortunate enough to know you in that context,
Yeah.
that's your approach to life and things you've learned through that profession, which once again, as the bigger picture, I think is so important to show that these are things that can be applied virtually almost anywhere.
Yeah.
That mindset.
Yeah.
Right.
When one door closes, another one is available.
And exactly. And you could look at it as an opportunity or as a closed door, right? Just walk me through, you had a goal, if I remember correctly, where you're like, I'm going to walk out of this hospital in X amount of time.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to swim back at the spot where this happened in X amount of time. Let's fast forward to those things. And then I want to get into some of the broader questions as well.
Yeah. So the walking out of the hospital came while at Craig. So that was that preliminary meeting with that doctor, and that doctor was like, where do you see yourself when you leave here? And I was like, well, I see myself walking out of this hospital under my own power and getting in the car and going home. And at that time, I was starting to take some steps, but it was a possibility, but it was a very small possibility that was going to happen. And so that doctor's like, okay, well, you probably will need elbow crutches and these leg braces for the rest of your life if you are going to walk. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do it without any of those. And they were like, okay, well, just prepare yourself if this is going to be a reality. I'm like, I'll prepare myself when I deem fit, but this is how I'm going to walk out of the hospital.
You weren't taking the answer. Yeah.
No, that's. I'm sure looking back that I was not a difficult patient, but I think in some ways frustrating for them, because I would hear what they said, but I would not like say yes, or say like okay, or like I wouldn't say like okay, like I hear you. I'd just say my piece on top of that. And so, yeah, getting ready for that 3 months. So like once I was able to start walking at the walker, and then we started walking independently. And so yeah, with at 3 months, we went back home in November and get down to the bottom floor, and I'm like, okay, we're at the double doors that I'm gonna walk through, and we're gonna walk right up to this little pickup zone, and I'm gonna walk right up to the car, and we're gonna hop in. And we're like, okay. And so my mom's behind me with my gait belt to make sure if I fall that we can ease myself to the ground and I don't fall like a 6'2" tree. And yeah, we documented it, and I always look at my face when I show that video at lifeguard training and stuff, and my face is just, my face is like so still, but you can just tell like underneath like the eyes and the mind, my mind is just like, and plant and foot and foot.
Yeah,
and
one step after the other, very focused.
Just very focused on every little thing that's happening within those steps.
But you did it.
But I did it, and it was a huge moment. I don't think I smiled till I got in the car. Afterwards, like on the video that I shared, like I just kind of look at the camera and I'm like, okay, like got it. And so, but then for the 1 year, so my 1 year goal, and that was the goal I made while at Scripps in the hospital. So this is why I'm just gotten extubated. I'm maybe 10, 11 days post-injury. I have some leg twitches, and the doctor's like, hey, so what's your goal like a year from now? Like when it's your 1 year, like from injury date, what do you think you're going to do on that day? Like, well, how are you going to like move on? And I was like, well, I'm going to swim in the ocean back where it happened, past the surf and back. He's like, you're going to do what? I said, well, I'm going to swim. I'm going to get my fins on. I'm going to hop in the rip, and I'm going to swim up past the surf line, and then I'm going to swim back. And he kind of looks at my family. He's like, is there anything else that you think you're going to do? And I'm like, no, I'm going to do that. And he kind of was like, well, I can't advise that as your doctor to get back in the ocean where you broke your neck to do those activities again. And I was like, okay, I hear you, but this is what I want to do. Because I wanted to be back in the water as soon as possible. And I didn't want the ocean or any body of water to become a place of fear for me, because it never had been. It was always a place of kind of life and happiness for me. And so I always wanted it to be that way. And for that goal, I wanted it to be, I am here and I am still here and I will always be here in the ocean. And so that year to date came to fruition. And so with that stretch of beach, there's no real easy access. They're all about 30 to 40 sets of steep stairs. And, I just started walking at 3 months, and that was on level ground, and let alone taking 30 to 40 steps downstairs, which is not my strong suit. I honestly did a little 3/4 of a mile gnarly hike on our wedding day in Kauai, and that was an experience in itself, and we powered through it, and we laugh about it now, and I made my jokes a lot on that hike.
Sure.
But I remember walking down and seeing the waves. I'm like, okay, this looks very reasonable. It's like maybe 2 to 3 foot. Like, that's definitely manageable. I've been swimming in the pool, so I know where my stroke is. I know, like, I can't get my head up, but I can get a breath in. So, like, I know once I get moving, we'll be fine.
And at this point, all your vertebrae are fused and stuff
Yeah.
with the surgery.
Yeah,
and
so like I can
everything,
move
yeah.
like left to right, but like lifting my head is like, so I can't do like the head up freestyle and like see ahead of me. So it's like, wherever I'm going. Like, I don't know which way that is, but I'm going that
Look
way.
out, everyone.
Yeah.
Here it come.
Head down, bulldozing.
And this was at Oceanside, right?
This was at Beach Ave.
Oh, okay.
So this was the day before the bike surf contest.
Okay.
I did like a little private, small one, just with like some of the lifeguards. And so as we're walking down the steps to Beach Ave, a set rolls through, and it's like head high. And I'm like, shit. I don't know if I can do this. And my buddy's like, oh, we got this. We got a bunch of lifeguards coming. We got this. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm not fast. And I don't float well. I don't want to drown again. And he's like, oh, we got this. I'm like, okay. And so basically we created like a little system, like while we're sitting on the beach, where it's like, okay, how do we get me under waves without me like blowing by you guys and then me disappearing? Like, okay, how do we figure that out? It's like, okay, we have 2 people on the shoulders, 2 people on the hips, and 1 person at the heels. So that way we can push you and hold you down underneath the wave and then pop you up, tap you on the head to start swimming. And the person at the feet is just the last resort to, if we miss you, like, they got you. And so, yeah, that's how we got the fins on and got me swimming and tapped me in the back of the head to basically tell me, take a breath, we're going to hold you underwater, and then hold you down and then let you back up and let you go again, tap you to get you going again.
So how did that feel being 1 year after all of this crazy experience, once again, with your lifeguard, brethren next to you doing that? How was that moment?
Everything up until returning back to the sand was mission driven. Everything was like, this is how it's going to happen. And like, we got out past the surf, and one of the lifeguards I was working that day swam out with us and had a can, had a buoy, and they're like, oh, let's take a moment out here. And I'm like, okay, well, hand me the buoy because I don't float anymore, so I can hold on to that. And they're like, oh, this is cool. I'm like, yeah, cool. I'm ready to go back in. Like, this is my mission. I need to complete my mission. In my task. And so like, oh, okay. I was like, we can have a moment on the beach, but I need to get back. I was like, I need to complete my circuit. And so we go back in, and I remember just touching the sand when I got back and just overcome with emotion, just so much joy. There was some pain there, obviously. But I was just so stoked that a year from then, being in the hospital, relatively inactive,
Relearning how to walk
and being like, I made it past the surf and back and took some head-high sets on the head. Like, that's pretty awesome. Like, that was not pretty awesome. That was incredible. And so then the next day at the body surf contest, we did the swim out there. And that one was much easier because there's a nice current that runs right alongside the north side of the pier. So I didn't have to duck dive many waves, so we didn't have to do that too much. But that was a more public one. And that was also a very emotional experience, because then that was emotional because so like when I did get injured, it was right before the bike surf contest. And so that Saturday, obviously I wasn't there. I was in the hospital, but I only heard about it for the people that were there, and they shared their experiences. And they did a swim out during a little break in the action. And I don't know how many people swam out the day that weekend. But I remember when I returned a year later, and we did another swim out. And all these people were coming up to me and like, oh, I was here, like this is you? And like very amazed, and just the support from that community was just, I was like getting choked up now. It was very touching. And just the amount of people that were there just to swim with me. So it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, and this is why I want to share the story and what I told you at the beginning. I think about it all the time, and your approach and your mentality to it, and it indicates the community that's built around lifeguards, and around the connection that job develops, where you might not get that same thing with other professions.
Yeah.
And yeah, people that didn't know you, such a simple thing, but they feel that same unity regarding not just a connection to the ocean, but connection to the job. And I was thinking about this on the way driving over here this morning is, I mean, we're out there with trunks on, right? Like there's no, our protective gear is very minimal if you look at all the other professions that exist with things like having a weapon if you're a police officer, or a bulletproof vest, or the fire department has helmets, boots. When you enter the ocean, I mean, a wetsuit,
you're exposed.
A helmet, some fins. I mean, it's very, at the most, right? Versus most of the time in Southern California, it's a pair of trunks, your tube, and your fins.
Yeah.
And your body is the tool. And here is your story is identifying what can happen with the risks of that.
Yeah.
And being able to carry that forward for people to understand that, man, there's real consequences to this, is what most people don't understand. And, you know, having someone, let's say you told someone at a dinner party, hey, yeah, I'm a lifeguard.
Yeah.
Oh, it must be the best job in the world. You're like, well, yeah, but let me tell you a couple of, like, this whole conversation, right?
Yeah.
And this is what people don't realize, and which is why I want to have these conversations out there. But I mean, like I said, very inspirational, and yeah, a lot of the people involved in that, I mean, I'm sure they are thinking about it just the same.
A lot of things went right for me to be here in the way that I am. And part of that's me and my mentality, but everything that happened on the call went so right and so smoothly and so quick that it gave me the opportunity to be what I am today. And a little bit was luck, and a little bit was the way my body reacted. My body was very receptive to all the treatments that I was getting, and got it in a manner where it turned on relatively quickly. A lot of individuals that suffer these injuries are not as fortunate. Their bodies aren't as receptive, or don't react the same way. And so my body was, for whatever reason, very, very receptive to it. And my mindset was very positive and powering through, but my body just received it the right way somehow.
Yeah, and once again, in the lifeguard scope, on a fairly anticlimactic day, right? It wasn't some crazy gnarly surf, but it's just that knowledge of knowing where the sand is, and even smaller waves. I mean, the ocean is inherently dangerous, right? And I wanted to bring up with you, because through your experience, and then we had the Lizzie Lovett situation. It was the Huntington City Guard, who had a similar situation. I don't know all the details, but you were able to help her with some of that process as well, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, so what I kind of learned through my experience is everyone has very different varying levels of what they've gone through. Like, I had a couple guards talk to me that, they broke their necks where they needed fusion, but they didn't suffer any spinal cord damage where they lost the inability to do much of anything, or they had a little bit of issues where they still have some nerve pain, but not to the ability where they're like, you will never walk again, kind of extent that way. And I did, and I went through that. Like, it was a very rigorous process. And so I've kind of made myself available to individuals. Like, some doctors know of me, so if they have a patient that has suffered this type of injury, they shoot me an email or a text. And if the family wants me to meet them, I'll meet them or talk on the phone with them. And so this one, I forgot how it came across. Well, obviously Lizzie and her sister both, Lizzie guarded at Huntington City, and her sister was a state guard and worked with a lot of the supervisors that I worked with and through lifeguard training, and they knew my story and they knew what I do on this, like where I go and talk to people. And so that's how we got put in touch. And, we talked on the phone for a little bit, and then I went up and met her in the hospital, and we chatted and just shared what I went through and kind of what to expect. Because you don't know what to expect when, like, so many people told me so many different things, and you're like, some of it was right, and some of it was like, yeah, not what I experienced, but I ended up they got into Craig, so I got to explain kind of how that process went, and what kind of resources there are, and just kind of give any kind of support I could.
But here you are, once again, sorry to interrupt, but yeah. I just want to keep reiterating, like, here you are through this whole process, and it's still not about you. Mm-hmm. You're talking at our lifeguard training every year to talk about training, the importance of keeping your skills up, because one day you might respond to your own coworker. Yeah. Here you are giving advice to patients that aren't even in the lifeguard world. Like, you are giving this as a learning opportunity to the world. You're giving back consistently through this. And once again, that is service. Yeah. Right? That is about, you don't have to. I mean, you could have very easily gone a different direction with this, and hey, Drosko, sorry, I don't want to do an interview. Mm-hmm. No thanks. But here you are instead providing still through that. And once again, that is the mentality that we're always talking about, which I think is so cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And then let's, just because I know we're getting on towards the end of time here, we can talk about the details of this, as you know, and we have for hours. But I really like, at one of the lifeguard trainings, you used the idea of lifeguards being lifesavers, but then you said afterwards, but instead you're actually life givers in situations like this. Explain to me what you meant by that. Yeah, so I remember, and thank you for bringing that up. I remember when I was first trying to figure out, my presentation, my talk, and it's like, I was kind of breaking down the word lifeguard and like the different iterations of that, and in Spanish it's salvavidas, which is lifesaver. And it's like, yeah, we're lifesavers, we guard life. I was like, but in my instance, they gave life. They found me not breathing, barely with a pulse, extensive damage, and I came to, and their actions gave me the opportunity to continue to live a life, and a good life. And so the life giver is basically, you're giving the opportunity through your services, you're giving the opportunity for life, and you're providing someone, for me, the opportunity to be able to walk again, which continued my life in my career and what I do. And so, yeah, you save lives, but you also, through the actions, you give life. And I thought that was a great fitting for kind of the multiple iterations of our job and occupation. And we're looked at the tower as very chill individuals and like laissez-faire, but when needs come, we give the opportunity for life. So yeah, and we're talking about a matter of minutes, right? That we just talked about for an hour, right? And those specific minutes you train for forever to be able to do correctly, because if they would have moved your neck or done something different, maybe it wouldn't fragment could have made it a complete paralysis, which would have completely altered how that recovery would have been. So any tweak of the neck could have changed that outcome entirely. So the way they extricated me out of the water, took me out of the water, all gave me the opportunities to be where I am today. So walking, wearing sandals. No, I mean, I can't. Every time, like I said, I think about it, I'm truly amazed. And not to mention, right? I mean, that's how you met your wife. Now here we are after talking about this, and you guys just got married, right? She was one of your PTs, is that correct?
She was a student.
You met along the way through that process too.
Yeah, she was a student
Which,
at the
how
clinic I
cool
went
is
to.
that?
She was a student at the clinic I went to, and being the walking quadriplegic, I'm a very interesting case. So my PT brought her on to kind of just show her like, hey, this is like what, a very interesting case. Like you don't really see this very often. And so then like during her like off time and while I was stretching, we'd chat and so we got to meet that way. And,
Once again, lifeguard skills, being employed.
Yeah, being a conversationalist. Yeah, always a conversationalist.
Oh man. Well, Alex, I think this is a good way to end the podcast. I'm so glad that we were able to share this and have people listen to it because I just think it's really incredible.
Me as well. Yeah.
And thanks for letting me bug you. We've had this and reliving that with me here for other people to hear. I think it's going to be not just inspirational, but a lot of learning to happen from lifeguards, members of the public, and kind of everyone. So thanks, dude.
I appreciate it. And yeah, the ocean is a risky environment, and for me that day the only risk was me getting in. The surf was not at that time a risk for me, but yeah, I'm glad to have this opportunity to provide and give back, and hopefully give some person out there whatever they may need. So
Yeah, right on, dude.
appreciate you, Josco.
Yeah, you too.
Much love, brother.